Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life, and I will raise him on the last day. For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood remains in me, and I in him. So those are the words of Jesus Christ. But was he speaking literally? One morning, 12 centuries ago, in the 700s, a monk of the order of St. Basil, who was struggling with doubts about the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist, had just finished the consecration of the bread when he suddenly saw the host, as he elevated it, change into live flesh, and drops of blood came off of the host and landed on the corporal, the white linen cloth that sits on the altar. As you can imagine, the monk was astonished, and certainly his doubts were taken away. The interesting thing about this is that today, after 12 centuries, this miracle of the host flesh has retained its reddish form, and the blood has coagulated into 5 sphere-like globules with a total weight of 16 grams and 505 milligrams. In 1971, Pope St. Paul VI allowed the distinguished Italian scientist Edoardo Linoli, professor of anatomy and pathological histology and of clinical microscopy, head physician of the hospitals of Arezzo, to make the first scientific examination of the flesh and the blood. After 3 months of examination, the following results were given by Professor Linoli. He said the blood is real blood and the flesh is real flesh. The flesh consists of the muscular tissue from a heart, myocardium, specifically from the left ventricle of the heart, which is the section that gives life to the body, pumps the life to the body. The flesh and the blood belong to the human species. The blood type is identical in the blood and in the flesh. It's type AB positive, the most rare blood type. Even though there was no chemical preservation, the proteins and the minerals found in the flesh and the blood are exceptional, given their exposure to the atmospheric and biological agents of decomposition over the last 1,200 years. There are still living white blood cells, which indicates that the flesh is very much alive. The blood globules also were unique in that each one weighed exactly the same amount. Yet, when individually placed on a scale with the 4 others on the opposite scale, the single globule would tip the scale down, while the 4 would remain up. And so now here we are, 12 centuries plus later, and the Eucharistic miracle is still very much alive and can be visited in Lanciano, Italy, where I myself saw it up close and personal. So now let's jump ahead to 1996, 1,200 years later, where there was another Eucharistic miracle, but this time It was in Buenos Aires, in Argentina. Bishop Jorge Bergoglio was the auxiliary bishop there at the time. Of course, he is now Pope Francis. A consecrated host was found on the ground and soon placed in a glass of water to dissolve as it was placed in the tabernacle. Days later, the Eucharist was not dissolved at all. It had turned into bloody flesh. Cardinal Quaracino and Bishop Bergoglio took a photograph of the bloody host for the record, and then they stored it in a tabernacle to allow it to decompose. That was in 1996. 3 years later, in 1999, that same bloody flesh remained. That's when Dr. Ricardo Castañon, a Bolivian neurophysiologist, was called in to have the samples from the host examined in a laboratory environment. Dr. Castañon took it to the San Francisco Forensic Institute without telling anyone there what it was or where it came from. After testing, he was told the samples constituted heart muscle, specifically from the myocardium of the left ventricle. Further, the tests showed the blood was human, with human DNA, and of the most rare blood type, AB positive. The same as found also, by the way, on the Shroud of Turin. But following those results, the host was then taken to Dr. Frederick Zugabe, an esteemed cardiologist and forensic pathologist at Columbia University in New York. According to Dr. Castiglione, Dr. Zugabe tested the samples he was given and said that the person whose heart it came from must have been tortured. Further, Dr. Zugabe was reportedly amazed that when he studied the samples, they were pulsating like a living, beating heart. When Dr. Castañon first came across the miracle in 1999, he was an atheist. Today, he is a Roman Catholic. The results of this Argentine miracle were then compared to the results of the 1,200-year-old Lanciano Eucharistic miracle. And the scientific results were exactly the same. But now, in the 2000s, when they were doing this testing, they also were able to do DNA tests. And the results showed the exact same DNA from the two miracles, more than 1,200 years apart. It was the same DNA, the same man in the 700s and in the 1996 miracle. And so I ask you, how can it be that 70% of all Catholics do not believe in the real presence in the Holy Eucharist? If I were to tell you that the Pope was coming to St. James, we would have to call all the state police available to handle the crowds, and in no way would all the people fit into this church, the largest of our churches in the diocese. Yet, when I tell you that Jesus Christ himself, the living God, is present right here, right now, in that tabernacle, and in a few moments will make himself present right here on this altar as I offer the words of consecration. Do we really believe it? If we really believed it, wouldn't we be walking up to receive him, questioning ourselves whether we are worthy to receive him? Now, obviously, none of us are worthy. But what I mean by that is, have we prepared our souls by making as certain as we can that we have no mortal sin that would make us an impure vessel to house our blessed Lord? For example, something as simple as missing Mass on Sunday without a good reason is still a mortal sin. And yet, people walk right up to receive Holy Communion. If we have mortal sin on our soul and we receive Holy Communion, what should be our liberation has become our damnation. Jesus said, "For my flesh is true food, and my blood is true drink." What does that really mean to you?